Hello and welcome back to Forgotten Energy Mini Stories episode number 2. And today we have a couple stories for you. The first story today comes from Regular Salary 3973 on Reddit. Ghost Boy saves my life. Freshman PE, I'm hanging out in the pool with my friend and the rest of my classmates. I decided to see how long I could hold my breath for, so I plunged underwater and proceeded to push all air out of my lungs and just sit there at the bottom of the pool. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heart when all of a sudden I hear a voice of a young boy say loud and clear, "Please breathe." I leap out of the water and look around, thinking it's one of my classmates, but no one was even near me. I told my friend about the experience and he was just as tripped out as I was. Although it was weird, I just put it off and proceeded with my day. A week later, while I was waiting to get picked up after school, in a different spot than I usually did, this spot was at the bottom of the hill, right next to the gym and pool. My mom had been running late, so I was just wandering around to kill time, which is when I noticed the memorial lock. I thought it was strange that there was a memorial lock in such a random place by the gym. I had assumed it was for a student. I looked closer and read the name, Cirky Rainey, thinking it was interesting and kind of sad. I took a picture of it and sent it to my friend, the same one by the pool. He texted me back almost immediately with a chilling message. Look at the death date. I looked down and read it when my heart stopped cold and my body went completely numb. The death date said September 12th, the exact same day I had the experience in the pool where a young boy had told me to breathe. Naturally, when I got home, I pulled out my computer and looked up Cirky Rainey. Turns out he was a 4-year-old boy who was run over by a truck right there where the plaque stood. I always felt like that day I had scared the boy into thinking I would die, just like he did. Obviously, I was nowhere near drowning, but a 4-year-old wouldn't know that. The voice was so clearly a young boy, and I'll never be able to unhear it. I'll never shake the feeling that the little boy saved my life. These kind of stories are actually always kind of sad, especially when it seems like it's a 4-year-old boy. I really hope that they're not stuck, not understanding that they have passed away, which I think is a common thing that people assume happens when you die unexpectedly. You kind of linger around the spot where you died and are unable to cross over into the next life or the next world or whatever you believe in. It's actually kind of touching that this little boy was at the pool with you guys just watching, looking around, and he saw you at the bottom of the pool not breathing, no air in your lungs, and he was like, "Please breathe." Uh, he really thought you were drowning and he was just looking out for you, so that's pretty wholesome of him. This story actually reminds me a lot of a story at my high school that I went to. There was a pool, or two pools actually. One of them was a long pool for regular laps, and one was a little bit smaller, but it was a lot deeper. And unfortunately, sometime in the 90s or 80s, I can't remember exactly, a young woman passed away, a student. In the pool, she drowned. And I never experienced anything in that pool as I was on the swimming team. But the stories go that every now and then you might feel someone tugging at your leg from beneath you. And I don't know about you, but that would freak me out if I was just minding my business practicing for the swim team and suddenly I feel like I'm getting dragged down underwater. Funnily enough, there was actually a security camera footage at my school that clearly shows somebody swimming in the pool. You can't really tell any defining features, but it's very clearly a person using their arms to swim, and it does a couple laps around the pool before it just completely vanishes. So I always thought that was pretty cool, and this story reminded me of that. The next story comes from True Tomfoolery, entitled "I was just trying to smoke a cigarette, not witness some paranormal BS." I worked as a wilderness therapy guide for a primitive living skills program, spending weeks at a time leading kids through the backcountry, teaching survival skills, and making sure no one wandered off into oblivion. Every morning, my supervisor Jay sent GPS coordinates for the next campsite, and we would pack up our bags and move. I never knew exactly where we were headed until I got the text, except for this place. This was the only site I had memorized, just so I could avoid it. It was beautiful, sure, a massive boulder at the top of a very large, gradually sloping knoll that overlooked the valley. The earth was deep red clay that had been speckled with large hunks of alabaster. Plenty of juniper tree cover provided shade and an anchor for setting up a shelter. The soft red sand made for easy sleeping, and the large sage bushes provided a wealth of useful items. A wash of cottonwood trees stretched down the east, and the distance was framed by pink and white mountain ridges. It was a visually stunning sight, but something about it set off what I call my dog vibe, that deep, primal instinct that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. I don't like to admit it, but I can be a huge whiny baby. I'm tall, built like a brick shed house, and spent my days hiking miles through brutal desert terrain. I felt tough, but this place, it made me feel bite-sized. I had spent one sleepless night at this site prior. There was something that gave the air a heavy feeling, and the surrounding geological structures created a strange impact on sound. This was the one location in the field where sounds would become heavily distorted. After setting foot in this place for the first time, I drew a big red X over the site on my map, and jotted down the direct course so that I could avoid this place later down the line. Nothing exceptional happened the first night I stayed there. It was just my dog vibe telling me to run. That morning, I sat by the fire, boiling water with pineapple skins for tea, when my GPS pinged. I checked the coordinates that had been sent to my inReach. From just the degrees I knew, I didn't even have to read the minutes and seconds. I dreaded where we were going. My supervisor had sent a message with the coordinates. Sorry dude, I know. I showed my co-staff Steve the screen. He took one look and busted out laughing. What'd you do to piss Jay off? Jay, our direct supervisor, was a good buddy of ours. After calling the office to request a location change, I was informed that apparently we'd been hiking too fast, catching up to other groups, so they had to divert us. There was not any other choice, and of course we got sent straight to my least favorite place. The hike was a mild 8 miles, but by the time we arrived the sun was setting, casting shadows across the technicolor clouds above the horizon, and the warm October air rustled in the treetops. We set up camp beneath a cavernous rocky outcrop at the apex of this hill. The campsite was a little less than a mile from the nearest service road. By the time we had finished setting up camp, kids shelter, staff shelter, fire pit, and sump, it chose a safe location to hang our food bags for the night. It was time to get the kiddos set up for a nice hot meal. Every individual made their own food, but the food was always better hot. Only on the worst nights you would go to bed without a fire, and I would never stay at this site without one. The boys were absolute powerhouses when it came to firewood collection, which made my life easier. We had a perfect system. Every night each person would try and find and carry as much wood as you physically could, and the winner would get to lead our hike the next day. We were so efficient at collecting wood that every morning we had to scatter the pile as an L&T, leave no trace measure, which earned staff bonus pay if done correctly, and at that point in my life I'd do almost anything for a few extra bucks. The wood was collected, camp was set, and the sun dipped deeper behind the mesas in the horizon. The boys started busting a coal for the fire. The only sound was the high-pitched screech of a bow drill kit filling the air. That was when I felt it. The ice. This part of the desert was full of life. Elk, deer, coyotes, raccoons, and small rodents. No cattle though. They never came this far out. I figured it was some scavenger waiting to comb the desert sands for dinner scraps. The night moved along. We had all sat down to feast our dinner and talk about our day. Part of the program was telling a fable or parable at some point of the day and having a group discussion about it. After everyone had finished cleaning their pots and hanging their pristinely packed food bags, high in the trees, we stoked the fire and began our group discussion. At this point, the world had been engulfed in darkness, and we could only see what the fire was illuminating. It was during this time that I felt an exponential increase in that feeling of being watched. It started once we put our bags down, but this was too much. I slowly scanned the surroundings to find the source of my unease. My eyes landed on a large sage bush, a distance from the fire directly in front of me. Then I saw them, a pair of eyes peering from behind the sage bush, the firelight reflecting in the pupil. Only, they weren't animal eyes, they were human. Adrenaline slammed into my chest. This was a real-life person watching me, watching Steve, watching my kids. I launched myself across the fire into the bush, flailing my arms and yelling as low, deep, and loudly as I could. After assaulting the poor shrubbery, Jay rolled out from behind the bush in stitches. He had parked his Jeep 2 miles away and hiked in just to scare me, and it worked. I was not laughing. In fact, I had become a little bit of a spoiled sport, as I berated him for his poor life choices. I had to, he told the boys. This is our least favorite site. I couldn't resist. We spent the rest of the night joking around the kids cackling because they could never imagine what I would do when I was scared. After a while, the little dudes went to sleep, and Steve, Jay, and I stayed by the fire, discussing the group's progress. Then around 1 a.m., Steve went to bed. Jay turned to me. "You want to go on a little hike?" We walked 30 minutes up a ridge, following the service road to a little vista, overlooking the entire valley. The desert stretched out below, reflecting silver in the waxing gibbous moonlight. Jay, being Jay, pulled out a pack of contraband cigarettes, massive no-no in the field, but I was a filthy nicotine rat, and not about to say no. If my supervisor wanted to give me a contraband, fine by me. We sat on a rock, backs to the road lighting up. We talked about everything while taking long drags. We were on our second cancer stick when from down the hill we saw headlights. A pair of round, white-yellow lights appeared over a ridge, climbing the incline 500 yards away. There was something about this set of lights that sent my dog vibe into hyperdrive. There was a pit in my stomach, but I thought it was just the anxiety of being caught red-handed with a cigarette. At this hour, it could only be a few things, and assuming the headlight shape looked like a Jeep, it was probably the vehicle of a hunter scoping for the best spot to land their tag, or someone lost. I remember that it couldn't have been a company vehicle. We would have known if the company's transport vehicles were coming out to meet us, so the anxiety should have left at this point, but it was just increasing ever so slightly. Something was off. The car wasn't making a sound. No engine, no tires on dirt, no brakes squeaking, and in the desert, you can hear everything. The lights gradually floated forward, stopping 50 yards away. We shielded our eyes against the glare. We kept smoking. If it was someone from our company out this late, they would have been one of our friends and wouldn't care. But maybe it was just someone in need of directions. Then, as we got up to walk towards them, the lights moved back. Still 50 yards away. We kept approaching, but the distance between us and the car stayed exactly the same. We paused our advance, taking in what we were looking at, and noticed the road curved left, descending down the hill, but the headlights? They were dead ahead. They were not following the road. This vehicle was not following the road. I started to become angry, as this area was known for cryptobiotic soil, and it's known that if you tiptoe on the crypto, if you have to touch it at all. How could someone be so obtuse that they would obliterate a colony of microorganisms that has been building its fortress for decades or up to hundreds of years? I regained focus of what was happening and waved my arms to signal the vehicle to stop. I looked down at where they were standing to see if maybe they had lost the road backing up. I wanted to follow the tire tracks to see if any damage was done. And where we were standing now, the headlights had been. I focused on the ground but only saw Jay and my footprints from our earlier hike. No tire treads, no marks. Jay saw what I was doing and tried to scan the surrounding ground for tread prints. As we were doing this, the lights did not move, in fact they hovered, perfectly still. There was something about this situation. It might have been related to my prior adrenaline dump earlier this evening, where I felt the most dread and impending doom I have ever felt. Tears started flowing from my eyes, but I had no way to control them. I was not sad. Maybe it was because of the fear? I grabbed Jay's arm. He looked at me. Neither of us spoke. We were each planning what to do next in our heads, thoughts moving far too quickly to try to say something out loud. Then the lights split apart. One veered left, the other right. They drifted slowly into the open desert, bobbing slightly up and down as they faded. The desert swallowed them whole. After standing in silence, acknowledging that we had both seen it, we were not insane. We turned back towards camp, hyper-vigilant as hell. As we passed the spot where the lights had vanished, a startlingly large owl seemed to materialize out of the dark and swooped silently over our heads. Jay flinched hard. I'd never seen him react like that. I wasn't scared of animals, but Jay looked like he had just seen a ghost. The chatting that we had done prior to seeing the owl had ended, and we made it back to camp in silence. I crawled into my bag to a snoring Steve, and Jay grabbed his pack and set up his little nook, fairly close to ours. I don't remember drifting into sleep, but I do remember waking up to the sounds of Scrub Jay chirping in the trees above us. In the early morning before the kiddos woke up, Jay, Steve, and I roused the fire before it was time to send Jay on his way. As the gentlewoman I am, I walked Jay back to his jeep. Once we were far enough from camp, I broke the silence. What the actual fuck happened last night? Jay didn't laugh. I've seen some weird shit before, he admitted. 4 years in the field, and yeah, I'm superstitious as hell. I'm just glad we got back in one piece, but I can see why you don't like it here. That's when he told me about owls. They're an omen of death, but not bad luck necessarily, he said, at least in my culture. I reached forward and gave him a quick hug while saying, "Well, thanks for coming out last night, man. I'm sorry for launching myself before I realized who you were." He laughed, remembering how he provoked me to Hulk smash a sagebush, and that eased the tension. After a few minutes of joking, we parted ways. There was another week of hiking till I finished my shift, but it was uneventful and nothing strange or weird happened. I still think about this every now and then, but I never stopped wondering. There were no tire tracks, no sound, just lights in the desert that shouldn't have been there. So that story leaves a lot to decompress. First of all, that must be terrifying being out in the wilderness and desert for weeks at a time with a bunch of children. Can imagine having to wrangle them all to do as they're told or anything like that. And for your supervisor to come up and scare you guys like that, that's actually pretty funny. But I guess that depends on who you are. You might get actually super scared and not think it's funny at all, but I thought it was pretty funny. And then the lights showing up randomly, like that, mimicking a car driving up to you. That must have been pretty terrifying, to be honest with you, being out in the middle of nowhere and suddenly seeing some headlights. And especially as you're walking towards them, they keep an equal distance from you at all times, even as you're making forward progress. I mean, realistically, it could have been anything, a spirit, energies, aliens. Now, what I was thinking about was once they did split off, I'm wondering if their intention was to try to make you and Jay go different directions to be isolated. But, I mean, who knows what their true intention was there. Then the part with the owl, that one really reminded me of another folklore story that's primarily out of northern Mexico or South Texas, New Mexico, Arizona areas. There's this spirit called La Lechuza, or the Owl Witch, which is basically was a woman who was wronged by someone or that made a deal with the devil to get supernatural abilities. And that ability is to be able to turn into an owl, a abnormally large owl, like you mentioned in the story. And its main purpose is to try to hunt someone to feed and or to sacrifice. And yeah, uh, where Jay said that they're an omen of death, not necessarily bad luck. I've heard it both ways. I guess it just really depends on the culture, where you're from. But if it was La Truth, I think both of you got off pretty lucky. Because I've heard some other stories that don't end very well. And for this. And that would be it for today, guys. Thank you for joining me, listening to these stories. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Forgotten Energies Podcast. Right there, you'll see our email. If you so happen to want to send in a story of your own, I'll happily read it on here. You can email it to us, send us a DM on Instagram, whichever works for you. Until next time, thank you guys.